I want to talk to you before a decision that looks loving becomes something else. My name is Eleanor. I am 72. I raised 2 children who became very good adults. I am proud of them. I am proud of the way I loved. I am proud of the small house where I learned how to stand on my own after life took my husband first and my parents later. I am not telling you a tragedy. I am telling you about a set of rooms, a sequence of mornings, and the soft way a person can drift out of her own life while smiling at people she adores. Maybe you are like me. You do not want to be a burden. You want safety. You want company at dinner. You want to know that if you fall, someone will hear. You want the laughter of grandchildren in the hallway. Tell me something. When you imagine that hallway, whose shoes are on the floor? Yours or theirs? Which smell is in the kitchen? Your soup or a food you never learned to love? Which window do you open without asking? Which chair takes your weight without the feeling that you are borrowing it? The first time my daughter invited me to live with her, the words felt warm. Come stay here for a while. There is space. The kids will love it. You will not be alone. I remember the light through her curtains. I remember a vase with lilies. I remember thinking how lucky I was. Do you remember a room that felt safe before you even walked in? Do you remember saying yes to something because every face around you was relieved when you did? People called it wise. A friend from church said it was the dream of every mother. A neighbor said I would save on rent and groceries. A cousin listed the numbers like a small hymn: food, gas, repairs. He looked satisfied. I smiled and nodded. I also wrote down a list no one saw: window, door, key, morning, silence, my chair. I did not show that list to anyone because it felt selfish to name the parts of a life that are only yours. What would be on your list if you let your hand move without judgment? Would the words be small, or would they surprise you by how big they feel? The invitation ripened over a winter. There were practical reasons. My knee made stairs a slow project. My doctor liked the idea of someone hearing me if I needed help at night. A cousin sent me an article about multigenerational households. The photos looked like joy. 3 generations around a table, matching sweaters, a dog under a chair. Do you ever notice how photographs tell the truth about smiles, but never about the cost of those smiles once the camera goes to sleep? I sold my house in April. I told myself the timing was right. The market was good, the lawn was too much, the basement had become a museum of things I did not need. I closed closets and whispered thank you to the rooms. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen and ran my hand along the edge of the counter where the laminate always lifted a little in summer. It is a small thing, but I knew exactly where it lifted. It is strange what becomes home: a lifted edge, a chipped mug, a shaft of morning light that always lands on the same tile. What minor imperfection in your space makes you feel like you belong there? The day I moved, my daughter put a welcome sign on the door. The grandchildren had drawn hearts and marker. My son arrived with a toolbox and a necessary confidence. We carried boxes that were lighter than memories. I had pared my life down to what I thought would fit in a single room and a corner of the hall closet. Have you ever shrunk your life to make it easier for other people to love you? The room was pretty: a soft blanket, a small plant in the window, a lamp with a warm shade. There was no lock on the door because there had never been a reason for locks in this house. I told myself that was a sign of trust. Kindness can feel like a lock when you want to believe that nothing difficult will happen. Have you ever traded a small piece of safety for the feeling of being kind? The first night, I slept like a guest. The second night, I tried to sleep like family and could not. A house has a rhythm. You can love that rhythm and still not belong to it. Have you ever joined a song that was already halfway in and realized your voice did not know the key? The dishwasher hummed later than mine ever did. The thermostat clicked on at a temperature that kept the children happy. A hallway light stayed on because someone was afraid of the dark. None of it was wrong. The body still keeps score of what is yours and what is not. I arranged my books on a small shelf under the window. I put the kettle on a tray beside the lamp. I told myself I could make a morning anywhere. The grandchildren visited my room like a small parade. They touched the plant and asked if it had a name. I said, "Not yet." We decided on Pearl. The naming made me feel included. Inclusion is a lovely word. It is also a word that can mean welcome to a circle you did not draw. Which circles in your life did you draw? And which circles were drawn for you while you smiled and stepped inside? For the first weeks, I kept a notebook, not a diary, a ledger of tiny shifts, a new brand of Cheerio, a different laundry smell, breakfast at a time my stomach did not expect. I noted what felt like friction. I noted what felt like new grace. The children's laughter in the morning felt like grace. Waiting to read until the house settled felt like friction. Do you mark these things in your mind? Do you pretend that friction is just you being sensitive because sensitive is a word you learn to use against yourself? We had a Sunday brunch routine. Pancakes, fruit, a joke that was always funnier to them than to me. In my old life, Sundays were for a library that opened after church. I loved the smell of old paper and the whisper of pages. When brunch began to claim Sundays, I smiled and reached for syrup. Love often asks for substitutions. Some substitutions are gentle, some are expensive. Which substitution in your life cost more than the label said? I tried to make the room mine, a photograph on the dresser, a small rug that held the memory of my feet. I placed my teacup on the windowsill. In my house, the cup had always returned to the windowsill after use because the windowsill was a small altar to mourning. In my daughter's house, the windowsill hosted little hands and art projects and the occasional superhero figurine. My cup was moved one afternoon to make room for a castle made of paper. It's just a cup, I thought. How many times can you say it's just a small thing before the small things built a second life you did not choose? I learned the choreography of someone else's kitchen. I learned where pans lived and which drawer held the good spoons. I learned to ask before moving a jar. I learned to ask before opening a window. I learned to ask before speaking a preference that would require anyone to bend. I did not learn this because my daughter is unkind. She is kind. I learned it because I want peace and because I am good at reading rooms. Are you good at reading rooms? Have you ever realized that your talent for peace was built on the quiet removal of your own edges? A neighbor came by with muffins. She said we were lucky to live in a house with 3 generations. She said it builds character for children. She said it saves money. She said it makes holidays easier. She is not wrong, but sometimes what is true at the level of a neighborhood is not true at the level of a body. My body missed the clicking sound of my old door when it locked. It missed the way that sound told my nervous system to put its backpack down. Do you have a sound like that? Do you hear it often enough? My doctor asked how the transition was going. I said fine. Fine is a small word with a heavy coat. He nodded and changed the subject, because doctors also learn to read rooms. On the bus home, I wondered why I had not said the other sentence. I miss owning my morning. Why do we protect our loved ones from the cost of the choices we make for their comfort? Who taught us that silence is the same as love?
One afternoon, a friend from my old neighborhood called. She asked how I was. I said I was grateful. She waited. Good friends wait. Then she said, I hear the gratitude. I do not hear Eleanor. I laughed and changed the subject. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to say my own name out loud. It felt like a coat that needed tailoring. Does your name still fit you, or has it been altered by a house that is not yours? I volunteered to help with homework. I taught my granddaughter to cut an apple without fear. Her hands were steadier than mine at her age. She said, Grandma, you are good at teaching. The sentence touched a bell I had forgotten. I used to teach adults how to read. In this house, I had become a maker of snacks. There is honor in snacks. There is also a certain hunger that only vocation feeds. What did you used to do that made your spine remember it had a purpose? I told myself I was safe. Safety is a true gift. It was also true that safety had become the currency with which I bought permission to be small. It is a strange bargain. You keep the risk away from the people you love by letting the risk live inside your own quiet. Then one morning you wake up and the risk is that you might not recognize your own handwriting. When did you last see your own handwriting in a place that mattered? The room began to hold my breath the way a jar holds air. I kept gratitude on the surface. Gratitude is good. Gratitude is not a cure for a structure that slowly erases the person it is supposed to protect. I baked more bread. I babysat more mites. I did favors that nobody asked for and then felt proud. Pride kept me busy and away from hard sentences. Pride is an excellent broom. It sweeps feelings into corners and teaches you to admire your clean floor instead of the heap that grows in the shadows. What heap is growing in your shadows? Let me pause here and say something practical with care. If this conversation is helping you name something you could not name before, a gentle tap on the like button tells the system that older voices matter and that other people who need this can find it too. It costs nothing and it keeps stories like this moving through the world. Thank you. There is a moment I remember with an accuracy that surprises me. I had been in the house for 3 months. It was a Tuesday. The late afternoon sun turned the hallway into gold. I reached for the window latch to let in the evening air. My hand stopped in midair because I heard the voice in my head that said, "Ask first." There was no rule about windows. There was only a gentle culture. The culture said, we check because we love each other. The culture also said, we do not make changes without the general. In a war, this is wisdom. In a home, it can be a slow contract that steals the key from your pocket without ever touching your coat. Is there a place in your life where you ask a question no one asked you to ask? I started to hide little pieces of myself in polite phrases. I am fine. I do not mind. Whatever is easier. I became someone who does not mind. But I minded. I minded the way my teacup migrated away from the window. I minded the way my morning waited for the house to pick a speed. I minded the way my name felt like a guest at a party that used to be mine. What phrase do you use that feels like a disguise? I want to be clear. My daughter loves me. I love her. The golden cage is not built by villains. It is built by gratitude, by habit, by the quiet way we avoid difficult sentences. Sentences like, I need a key that is only mine. I need a morning that does not apologize. I need a chair where I do not ask permission to be still. We avoid these sentences because we are afraid that they will sound like accusation. We avoid them because we think love should not need a lock. We avoid them because it is easier to be grateful than to be specific. What sentence are you avoiding because you believe it will sound ungrateful? The day I realized I was inside the golden cage was not dramatic. No one shouted, no one cried. I simply looked for my teacup, and it was not where I put it. I looked again. I felt silly for tearing about a cup. Then I noticed my morning was now a hallway of small approvals. Can I open this window? Can I chop this onion? Can I listen to a sermon without headphones? I became a quiet guest in my own voice. Can you remember an object that used to be yours and slowly became a shared item with conditions? I thought about a woman I met years ago at the library. She had a phrase she used when she needed to choose herself. She would say, I'm going to keep my key today. She said it kindly. She said it the way one might say, I'm going to keep my sweater because the air is cool. No apology, no debate, a small declaration of sovereignty. Do you have a phrase like that? Would it help to borrow hers until yours arrives? I also remembered my mother in her last decade. She had a garden behind a rented house. The landlord was strict. No changes without permission. My mother never asked to plant tomatoes. She planted marigolds in tons because pots did not require permission. For years, I thought she loved marigolds more than tomatoes. I wonder now if she loved tomatoes and chose marigolds because marigolds could be moved without paperwork. What part of your life is a pot because the ground is not officially yours? After 3 months, the house and I had a rhythm that did not include my handwriting. The grandchildren learned to knock. The dog learned that my room had crumbs. My daughter learned that I would say yes to almost anything. I learned that a person can be erased by love if love is not paired with structure. Erasure by cruelty is obvious. Erasure by kindness is a museum with soft lighting. It takes longer to notice what is missing because the room is beautiful. I had one small rebellion. I bought flowers on a Friday and put them on my table. In my daughter's house, flowers were a luxury for holidays. I bought them anyway and told no one. The flowers were yellow. They made the room feel like a fresh page. My granddaughter asked if there was a celebration. I said yes. She asked what we were celebrating. I said the idea of keys. She nodded like a person who remembers something she has not been taught yet. What small act could stand in your room and quietly remind you that you still have a door of your own? At night, I would lie in bed and imagine different maps. One map kept me in that room with new agreements. One map moved me to an apartment within walking distance. Another map introduced the idea of a roommate my age. Another map took me back to my old neighborhood, to a smaller place where the library would still be within reach. Which map makes your shoulders drop? Which map makes your breath become easy? I do not want you to hear contempt in my voice. I want you to hear caution. You can love your children and still lose yourself while living in their house. You can save money and spend your autonomy. You can be safe from a fall and fall into a life that no longer belongs to you. The world does not warn you about this. I am warning you because I wish someone had warned me. If you are a son or a daughter watching this, Do not leave. I am not accusing you of anything. You carry work, bills, noise, hope, exhaustion. Maybe you invited your mother or your father out of love. Maybe you felt you had no other option. I want to show you a way to keep love and remove the cage. Stay with me. Before we go to the next block, breathe with me. In slowly, out slowly. Ask yourself with kindness, in my own story, where do I live? In a room that is mine, or in a space I am borrowing from the people I love? What does my morning look like if I don't have to fit anyone else's schedule? What smell means home to me? Who knows my real name and uses it in a way that makes me stand a little taller? The golden cage does not need to close. There is still time to shape the bars into something else. But to do that, we need to talk about the slow erosion that makes good people forget who they are. We'll go there together. If you want these conversations to keep finding you without you having to search for them, consider subscribing. It tells the system that long-form stories from older people matter, and it brings the next chapter to your porch like a letter with your name on it. I'll meet you in the next block. Bring your tea. Bring your list. Bring the small part of you that remembers the sound of a key in a door that is only yours.
The first thing that eroded was time. I did not notice the exact day it began. Erosion never sends a letter. It happens in tiny negotiations that sound reasonable when you say them out loud. The house had tides of its own. Breakfast moved a little later on school days and a little earlier on soccer days. My tea cooled while a backpack was repacked with a trumpet mouthpiece that had gone missing again. Nights stretched because homework lived where evenings used to be. None of this was wrong. The people I love were doing what families do. Still, something quiet in me kept counting minutes that no longer belonged to me. Has a day in your life ever rearranged itself by good reasons until you could not find your morning anymore? Sundays had always been a sanctuary. In my old neighborhood, a modest library opened after church. The door was heavy and the handle cool. The room had that library light, the kind that makes dust float like soft stars. I used to pick a desk near the window and sit where the sun warmed my left shoulder. Only then did I call anyone. Only then did I join anyone else's schedule. In my daughter's house, Sundays turned into brunch. I loved the pancakes. I loved the syrup the children poured in spirals, then circles and spirals again. I loved that the dog parked himself like a rug under the table, receiving crumbs as if he were a saint. I also missed the library. I told myself love means choosing pancakes and smiling. Why does love sometimes ask us to swallow small parts of ourselves without chewing? Which ritual did you trade away because everyone around you seemed happier with the trade? Space was next. My room was pretty, gentle, thoughtfully arranged. A plant in the window, a blanket that felt like a promise. The door did not lock. No one barged in. The children were taught to knock. Adults did what good adults do. They waited and they asked. But a door without a lock is still a suggestion and not a boundary. I found I could rest with one ear awake. I slept like a guest who never fully puts her suitcase away. Have you ever felt your nervous system unclench at the sound of a door clicking, and then discovered that the only click available to you now is politeness? I try to solve space with gratitude. Gratitude is a warm coat. It does not change the weather. I rearranged the small shelf below the window. I nested my books like birds in a hollow. I placed my teacup on the sill where morning light was brightest. Once, my granddaughter set a diorama there, a cardboard castle with a cotton ball cloud that deserved a stage. My cup moved to the dresser. This was a sweet kingdom. I cheered the cloud. Later, I could not find the cup. It is not the cup, I said to myself. It is the journey the cup takes that tells you whether you live here or visit here. Which object maps your day in a way only you can read? Money eroded too, not in a dramatic sweep, but in a mist. I wanted to pay for my own groceries. My daughter wanted to pay for mine. I accepted her kindness and then discovered a small cost wrapped inside it. I used to buy flowers on Fridays. Flowers at my daughter's house were reserved for holidays, a sensible rule in a house with growing children and shoes that produce holes as if by magic. I told myself I could live without flowers. People have lived noble lives without tulips. That was true. Here is what was also true. I cannot live well without the freedom to decide when a flower belongs on my table. Which small purchase tells you that your life is not a committee? Language followed. Language always follows. We changed how we asked one another for what we needed. My daughter would say, "Are you sure you want to go out alone?" I would hear, "Do not go out alone." I would answer, "Of course, I can wait." She would hear, "Thank you for deciding for me." No one said what they meant. We were a kind family. Kindness without clarity is a recipe that bakes resentment quietly. What words do you use that are really shadows of the words you need? Roles shifted without a meeting. I had always been the person who left a spare key with a neighbor and taped the emergency numbers inside the cupboard door. In this house, I became the person who was texted about the emergency numbers someone else taped. I used to carry responsibility like a well-packed bag, balanced and known. Now responsibility hovered in the hallway like a drone, whirring between heads, none of us fully sure who was piloting it. When did your role move 2 inches to the left? And did anyone notice enough to say it out loud? I tried to fix erosion with a sweeter temperament. I doubled my pleases and my thank yous until the air itself felt sugared. I baked bread more often. I volunteered to babysit on a night when I wanted to sit with my book. I did not resent them. I disliked the version of me who kept choosing to be the easiest person in the room. Are you the easiest person in more rooms than you want to be? A Tuesday afternoon offered a lesson. My granddaughter needed an apple sliced for a snack. She held the knife like a violin bow. I said, "Let me show you something." I placed my palm lightly on the top of the blade and guided the other hand around the apple, slow, steady, safe. She watched the apple fall into clean crescent moons. "Grandma, you are good at teaching," she said. The sentence landed like a bell ringing in a building I had not visited since moving. I used to tutor adults who wanted to read their mail without asking for help. I used to watch their faces lift when a word finally stood still for them. In this house, I was not a tutor. I was a helper with cookies. Helpers are worthy. I also needed to be a person with a vocation. Which title belongs to you that no one has spoken in your presence for months? I began to keep 2 lists. One lived in my pocket on a caper, folded so many times that the edges fuzzed. The other lived in my head. The list in my pocket had 3 columns. Things I asked for without guilt. Things I asked for with guilt. Things I no longer ask for. The last column grew fast, like ivy you forget to trim. The list in my head was shorter and heavier. It had 3 words: Window, morning, key. If you made your own list, would any of your words fit in the palm of your hand and still weigh so much?
A note on the kitchen counter changed the temperature of our language. It said, "Please do not use the gas stove when no one else is home." The sentence was written in my daughter's careful print, the same hand that once made a banner for a school play and labeled every storage bin in a garage. She left the note with love. I read it with a feeling that surprised me. I have been using a stove since before you were born, I thought, and then felt disloyal for thinking it. I understand fear. I also understand what happens when a house becomes a classroom and a parent is enrolled as a child. Where in your home did roles reverse so politely that you were expected to applaud? That night, I could not sleep. I listened to the wind tapping a branch against the gutter. I imagined the kitchen at 2 a.m, dark, quiet, mine for 6 minutes. I pictured striking a match and hearing the small bloom of flame. I pictured the exact way I would stand beside the stove, spine straight, hands steady, like the adult I have been for decades. I did not get up. I was proud of being good. I fell asleep proud and woke up sad. Have you ever congratulated yourself for doing the right thing and then wondered why your throat felt smaller? I thought about calling my friend from the old neighborhood. She is good at hearing the sentence hiding inside the sentence. She is also very direct, and sometimes my courage is allergic to direct people. I did the easier thing. I wrote a gratitude list. The list was not fake. Safety, laughter, a full table, hands to help carry boxes. I placed the list on my dresser and felt calmer. Gratitude is good medicine. It cannot cure a structural illness. Do you sometimes medicate a structural problem with a feeling because a feeling is faster? A few days later, my daughter and I had coffee at the kitchen table while the kids built a city out of cardboard on the floor. The city had a train and a bakery and a post office that made me smile. I told her I missed the library on Sundays. She said, "We can save a Sunday for you." She said it with love. The next 3 Sundays filled up with birthday parties, a recital, and a fever. I watched the calendar put its arm around the promise and steer it into a corner. Promises do not usually break. They are simply postponed until they look honest. Which promise made in good faith keeps dissolving on your calendar like sugar that never becomes syrup? I tried to move my library ritual to Wednesday mornings. Wednesday mornings already belonged to the piano teacher. I changed it to Thursday, which belonged to a late meeting. I told myself, adult suggest. Then I remembered that I am, in fact, an adult. I had been adjusting so well that I began to receive compliments for it. You are so easy. You are so flexible. You make everything smoother. Compliments can be cushions that encourage you to stay seated. Which compliment keeps you small because it arrives with a candy coating? On a Friday, I decided to buy flowers again. The grocery store had a bucket of daffodils that looked like a row of listening ears. I paid for them and felt the subtle thrill that comes when your money speaks in your voice. At home, I cut the stems, found a jar, and set them on my small table. They were ridiculous
and necessary. My granddaughter came in from school and asked if there was a celebration. I told her yes. She asked what the celebration was. I said, keys. She looked at me with the seriousness only children and poets have and nodded. She said, happy keys. When was the last time you celebrated something only you understood?
The stove note continued to haunt me in a corner of my mind. It was not the stove. It was the proof that fear had hired language to manage me. I thought of a different sentence that could have lived in that same space. How can we make this safe and still yours? Safety and yours. What a pair. I practiced saying it in the bathroom mirror. It felt like a bridge that did not make either side smaller. Which sentence do you need to rehearse until your mouth stops tripping over it? The dog taught me something too. He is a large brown creature with an old soul. He knows where he is allowed and where he is not. There's a rug near the door that he obeys as if it were a law. He stops with his paws exactly on the edge and waits. One evening he met me there as I came back from a short walk. He wagged and then paused with his paws on the line. I stepped over and put my hand on his head. We both stood half in and half out. I laughed at the felt wisdom of not always rushing into a room just because it is open. Where in your life do you need a mental rug that reminds you the threshold is not a conveyor belt? I spoke to my doctor again. This time I did not say, fine. I said, I sleep like a guest. He nodded. He asked if there was a lock on my door. I said, no, because we are a trusting family. He said, trust and locks are not enemies. He told me about patients who moved their parents in and then discovered that privacy is not a moral question, but a nervous system question. His word, not mine. He said, the body rests differently when it knows it can close a door and decide who comes through it. He did not tell me what to do. He gave me language. Who in your life gives you language instead of prescriptions? One afternoon, my old neighbor Mabry called. She asked how I was. I said, grateful. She waited. Good friends still wait. Then she asked one of her dangerous questions. What would change if you could change one thing? I said, a lock on my door. She said, that sounds small enough to try. Then she told me her story about a lock she installed after her granddaughter learned to walk. She said it saved love more than once. The sentence was so ordinary and wise that I felt embarrassed I had not thought it myself. What small addition would save love in your home? My daughter and I finally sat down for a delicate conversation. We put our palms on the table like two people agreeing to carry a heavy box together. I said, the note about the stove made me feel like I am enrolled as a child here. I know you wrote it because you love me. I also know I have been cooking since before you were born. She took a breath. She said, I did not know how to say I was scared without telling you what to do. We practiced a new sentence right there at the table. How can we make this safe and still yours? We both wrote it on sticky notes and stuck them to the inside of a cupboard where only we would see. Which sentence deserves to live on paper in your kitchen? We did not solve everything in an afternoon. We did make a few decisions that slowed the erosion. We agreed that I would keep a key to my door, even if the door did not yet have a lock. We called a handyman for a modest latch that would not confuse small hands, but would give my nervous system a way to exhale. We put 2 mornings on the calendar with my name on them, and no explanation required. We agreed that flowers on Fridays were not a luxury, but a ritual that made me more human and therefore easier to love. We even moved the teacup back to the windowsill and honored the castle with its own shelf. The children liked the ceremony of rearranging altars. What small ceremony could return one object to the place where your day becomes your day? If you are a son or a daughter listening, bring your hand to your chest and ask yourself with tenderness what you are actually promising when you say, "Stay with us." Are you promising safety only, or safety and sovereignty? If you are a parent listening, bring your hand to your chest and ask what you are actually agreeing to when you say yes. Are you agreeing to shelter at any cost, or to a shared life in which your mourning remains your own? None of this is about perfection. It is about shape. Lives need shape the way water needs a cup. When erosion changes the cup, the water spills. The mop you will use will be gratitude, and it will work for a while. Then the floor will be damp again. The answer is not a bigger mop. The answer is a cup that fits. What part of your life needs a better cup? There is a simple practice that began to help me. Once a day, I would step outside the house alone and take 10 slow breaths without explaining why. Sometimes I only walked to the mailbox and back. Sometimes I walked to the corner where the maple tree holds the sky like a basket. Those 10 breaths were a private treaty between the sovereign nation of my life and the beloved neighboring state of my daughter's life. Treaties prevent small border skirmishes. Where could you place 10 breaths in your day without asking anyone's permission? If this story is giving you words you can use with someone you love, consider subscribing now so the next chapters arrive without you having to remember to come back. It is a quiet way to tell the system that long conversations about aging and autonomy deserve a place at the table, and it helps more families find a way to choose each other without choosing erasure. By the end of that season, I understood something I had resisted. Gratitude is a virtue. It is not a boundary. Love is a force. It is not a plan. Safety is a blessing. It is not a substitute for sovereignty. The erosion had not been malicious. It had been polite, convenient, and cumulative. The cure would not be dramatic. It would be a structure that honored both love and autonomy. Spoken out loud while everyone was still calm, written lightly on paper so the house could remember on days when hearts forgot. This is where the story turns. Not away from my family, but toward a way of being family that does not require anyone to disappear. In the next block, we will build that structure with sentences you can actually say and maps you can draw on your own table. Bring your calendar, bring your 3 words, bring the courage that lives behind your teeth. We are going to place doors where there were only curtains and make sure the keys fit every hand that needs one. You can tell a family truth without breaking it. I did not believe that at first. I thought truth came with splinters, that if I spoke what my body knew, I would chip the table we eat at. But love can carry a careful sentence. It only asks that you speak it before resentment starts editing your mouth. The afternoon I learned that, the house smelled like oranges and soap. The children were outside, chalking constellations on the driveway. My daughter stood at the sink, drying a pan that did not want to be dry. I could hear the cloth complain against the metal. I had a sentence in my pocket and a small, steady drum in my chest. Do you know that feeling when a line of words asks to be said and you keep them in your palm because your palm feels safer than the air? I began with a picture because pictures are kinder than orders. I love the noise of this house, I said. I love the way the dog understands birthdays better than calendars.
I love how the floor becomes a drum when small feet run past my door. I also need a door that can complete its sentence. I need a morning that isn't borrowed. I need one small ritual on a Friday that belongs to me without permission. I stopped and waited. The pan on the towel made a last small sigh, like a bird folding a wing. My daughter kept her eyes on the pan, because bravery sometimes looks like watching a reflection while you think. Where do your eyes go when you're trying to keep a room from breaking? "I hear you," she said finally, and I believed her, because her voice lowered the way it does when she talks to herself in the car. "I'm scared of the stove when you're alone. I'm scared of the stairs when no one else is home. I don't want to say no to you. I don't know how to say I'm scared without making rules." There it was, the soft engine of our trouble. Fear with a kind face, rules with perfume. If you could put a name tag on the thing under your arguments, what would the tag say? I took a breath that felt like it had been waiting in a closet for months. "Let's make a picture that includes your fear and keeps my adulthood," I said. "Not a rule book, a picture. In mine, there's a latch on my door. In mine, there are 2 mornings a week that carry my name in ink. In mine, there are flowers on Fridays, because the world looks less like a task and more like a table when there is one honest color on it. In yours, what belongs?" She turned the pan over as if reading a label. "Predictability," she said. "A way to know when you're out and when you're back without having to ask twice. A few simple safety rituals that I don't have to enforce. Look at your own life. If someone you love asked you for predictability, what would you hand them that isn't a leash?" We sat at the kitchen table with 2 mugs that misunderstood the weather, steam rising in a warm room, and we tried a small structure. 15 minutes for feelings, 20 for logistics, then a recap short enough to fit on a recipe card. Feelings first, because logistics are bullies when they go first. I said, "I'm afraid of becoming a polite shadow." She said, "I'm afraid of getting a call and wishing I had been braver in the kitchen a week earlier." I said, "I'm afraid that asking for a lock will sound like I don't trust you." She said, "I'm afraid that buying flowers will sound like you don't respect our budget." What would your 15 minutes sound like if both people spoke fears without auditioning for the role of the most reasonable adult? When we moved to logistics, the words felt lighter. A handyman we both liked could install a simple latch that small hands couldn't mistake for a game. A sign for my doorknob, a blue tassel for "entering is welcome," a gray tassel for "quiet country." 2 mornings for me. Tuesdays for the library and adult literacy. Thursdays for wandering nowhere on purpose, which is its own sacred geography. She asked what would happen on a Thursday if a delivery arrived early. I said the box could wait until my name returned to the house at 11. My spine believed me before my mouth finished. Where in your week would a small tassel tell the truth without a conversation? Money came next, and I braced for the awkward heat that money carries into rooms where love tries to keep everyone cool. It did not come. We said numbers out loud. We wrote them. The part I paid into the household would leave my account on the 1st of the month without anyone having to perform generosity in the grocery line. My small rituals would live in my own pocket. Tea, flowers, a book that did not ask permission to be chosen. She told me gifts were nervous because gifts bend budgets when they walk in wearing a bow. I promised we would receive gifts with kindness and not use them to renegotiate the edges of the picture. The room felt taller. Do numbers make your room shorter or taller? Which number, if said out loud once a month, would add a window? Language, with the last tool on the table, and the first tool we should have reached for. We tried sentences on the mouth like coats in a mirror. How can we make this safe and still yours? It hung well. Show me how you prefer to do it, and I'll be nearby. It fit even better. We laughed at don't, not because don't is never useful, but because don't had been our winter jacket on a day that needed a sweater. I wrote the sentences on a sticky note and pressed them inside a cupboard door where only we would see. Later, when fear came back with its polite voice, we could open the cupboard and borrow the right words before the wrong ones put on their shoes. Do you have a cupboard in your life where better words could wait on paper for the moment you need them? That evening, the dog found a spot half in and half out of my doorway and fell asleep there. Proof that thresholds can be restful. I turned the new latch slowly, not because anyone was listening, but because my own nervous system likes the ceremony. The click sounded like a sentence finishing with a period instead of a question mark. I lay down and realized I'd been sleeping with my shoulders not quite on the pillow. That night, they learned the geography again. When was the last time your body told you that an agreement had worked without any words involved? The next morning, I was brave enough to be ordinary. I set the kettle on the stove at 7, with the window cracked and the timer clicking its little metronome. I cut an apple in careful moons and put the tea on the sill where light collects like a quiet audience. When my daughter walked in at 8, she looked not at the stove, but at my face. "You look like a person who owns her morning," she said, and we grinned like two conspirators. Has anyone said that to you lately? If not, could you be the one to say it to yourself first? The adjustments were small and strangely muscular. Tuesdays grew a spine. My granddaughter learned the tassel colors faster than any adult. She would point to gray and whisper, "Queen sleeping," then tiptoe away like a joyful spy. My grandson asked if the flower day had a name. I told him, Happy Keys. "Is there such a thing as sad keys?" he asked. "Only when we hang them on a hook and forget they belong in a door." He nodded, not because children believe everything, but because truth recognizes its own shape. What door in your life has been waiting for a key that you hung up out of habit? We tested our courage with a 30-day experiment. Putting an end date on bravery invites it to show up. We said we'd count 3 things: how many minutes each adult in the house earned for being uninterrupted on purpose, how many times a boundary rescued love, a latch used, a phrase borrowed before voices needed to rise, and how many resentments had to be named out loud before they grew feet. We promised to change the picture if the numbers told us that kindness was still costing one person too much. Would your courage come sit at the table if you told it the meeting ends in 30 days? Not every day wore the new clothes easily. On the second Thursday, the piano teacher moved her lesson into the exact hour when my errand had no name. The old habit lifted its hand immediately. "I can stay," I said, and then felt the sentence shrink me. I walked to the cupboard, read the sticky note, and tried again. "How can we make this safe and still mine?" I said to the air, which is where sentences practice before they meet a person. I left a map on the counter, the time I would return, the neighbor with the spare key, and the number where I would answer. I went anyway. The world did not fall apart. The piano found its hour somewhere else. Where could you practice a sentence with the air first, just to hear how your mouth holds it? On the 3rd Friday, I stood in the grocery aisle with the flowers and heard an old calculus start reciting itself. Dollars that could be saved, shoes that grow holes, a budget that behaves better without color. I almost put the flowers back in the metal bucket. Then I remembered the man I tutor on Tuesdays tracing the word onion until it stood still for him. Sometimes you repeat a shape until it becomes yours. I bought the flowers and took a photograph with my thumb. A yellow, humble proof of a treaty between me and my own heart. I sent it to my daughter with a single word: human.
She sent back 3 hearts and the word Friday, which felt like we had invented a small holiday and both of us knew the date. What single word could be your receipt for a life that is still yours? A few days later, a test arrived that our plan had not rehearsed. My daughter came home late, tired in the way that turns a voice into a shorter instrument. She said, "We have to move your Thursday morning for the recital practice." And the word have wore the old uniform. I felt the tug to be easy, the pride that likes to be useful, the comfortable habit of swallowing. But the latch had taught me something about doors and sentences. "I want you to hear my yes and my structure at the same time," I said. "Yes to the recital and yes to myself. I will be back at 11. If we need different hours, let's move the piano or the errand, not the person." She closed her eyes and nodded without speaking. The next morning, she wrote the new plan in ink on the calendar, as if it had always meant to be there. When was the last time you let "and" join 2 things you were told had to fight? Siblings are weather systems, generous and sometimes stormy. My son called with a voice that likes solutions. "We voted," he said, a sentence that will never again enter my home without a passport. "You should move downstairs permanently. It's easier." I told him I do not attend elections where I am the topic and not a voter. I invited him to a real conversation with the 3 of us in a room where pens are shared. "Bring your fear and your map," I said. "Leave your gavel." He laughed, which is how I knew we were safe. Have you installed a small border guard at the door where decisions try to walk in shrugging? We made one more addition, small and extraordinary. 2 names outside the family who carry a piece of the safety net so safety wouldn't become a leash. May, from my old block, kept a spare key and an ear for Tuesday stories. Omar at the library expected a text called "Proof of Tea" at noon, just a photograph of steam and a page. The paramedic who came to speak at the community center taught us to say out loud who we call first if we fall and can get up, and who we call if we can't. My daughter slept better knowing that safety was now a network, not a hallway with only one door. Who are your 2 names? And could one of them be the kind librarian who already knows your Tuesday? Underneath everything lived language, the quiet plumbing of a house. We practiced changing "Are you sure?" to "How can we make it safe and still yours?" And the water ran clearer. We changed "I'll do it" to "Show me how you prefer to do it while I stand nearby." And the pipes stopped sighing. We changed "don't" to "yes, if we add," and rooms that used to steam with frustration were only warm now. Do you have a sentence that, if you replaced it everywhere, would lower the weather by a degree? One evening, I wrote a letter that never needed a stamp. I taped it to the side of the fridge where we keep recipes for things we cook on purpose. "We are 2 worlds that touch," it began. "Love equals safety plus sovereignty. Knock, wait, listen, enter. Tuesdays 8 to 11 are mine. School night quiet at 10. Auto pay on the 1st. Flowers without permission. If the kitchen starts to shrink, we pause. On the first Sunday, we pour tea and review the map. Any map can change. No shame. My grandson asked why the letter looked like a poem. Because houses need poetry, I told him, and he accepted that the way only children and the very old do. If your home needed a small poem to remember itself on tired days, what would the first two lines be? Not every victory had fireworks. Some arrived as small, stable shadows that started showing up in photographs. I saw myself reading with my shoes off and nobody else's plan in the room. I saw Tuesday rain on my coat and the smile that was not performative. I saw my daughter using the cupboard words with her children, and I felt grandmotherly towards the sentences themselves, as if language could be kin. Do you have a sentence you'd like to adopt and raise until it behaves? We noticed something else. Apologies became shorter and rarer. When one of us slipped, when I knocked and turned without waiting, when she planned over a gray tassel, we said, "I forgot," not "you made me." Then we repaired with the sticky note instead of our pride. Pride is heavy furniture. Language is a hinge. Which would you rather lift on a weekday? By the end of the 30 days, the experiment felt less like a trial and more like the way the house had always meant to be. My daughter said the quiet was different now, no longer the brittle kind, but the kind that lets soup taste more like itself. I said the noise was different now too, no longer a weather report I had to stand under, but a song I could visit and leave and love without dissolving. We kept the latch. We moved one lesson. We added a tiny bookshelf near the window so the teacup and the castle could both have altars without pushing. Balance is not a trick. It is a shelf. If hearing this has put a small map in your hand, fold it once and tuck it somewhere you keep things you intend to use. You do not need permission to redraw your rooms. You only need one sentence spoken before the resentment grows shoes, one tassel to tell a threshold the truth, one morning with your name in ink, one Friday color that reminds you humans require beauty the way soup requires salt. If this kind of story helps you keep shape without losing love, you can save it or subscribe so the next chapter knocks without you having to wait by the window. Long conversations from older mouths deserve corridors to travel. Tomorrow, I will walk to the library, rain or no rain. I will teach Luis how the word onion grows into simmer, and simmer grows into patience, and patience feeds a family without eating anyone alive. I will return at 11 with a coat that smells like weather and a spine that remembers its purpose. I will turn the latch and sit with my tea. I will not ask the air for permission to be a person. The air, relieved, will not ask me for an apology. And in the evening, I will carry soup across 4 blocks to a table that has become wiser than it was when I moved in, and I will leave while I still feel like myself, which turns out to be the truest way to love anyone for a long time.
A few months after that first invitation, I chose a different shape for my life. I found a small apartment 4 blocks away, sunlight through the kitchen, a tree outside the bedroom window that looks like it is listening when the wind tells a story. The rent made me swallow. Then the first morning paid me back with change. I woke up before the birds. I sat with my book and my tea. The room was quiet and mine. The click of the door lock was a prayer I didn't know I still remembered by heart. What sound tells you that you belong to yourself? A kettle beginning, a pen uncapping, a key finishing its circle. My daughter helped me carry the last boxes. She stood in the doorway and looked around as if she were learning a new word. "I'm happy and a little sad," she said. "I'm happy and a little brave," I answered. We both laughed because sometimes courage has the exact same temperature as grief. We ate toast on the floor because the table had not arrived, and while we chewed, we made a rule without drafting it, close enough to borrow sugar, far enough to keep our keys. What rule could you whisper on a floor between bites of toast that would save your family 5 arguments this year? The first week in my place, I did nothing impressive. I folded towels the way I like them, 2 slow thirds and then a calm square. I put the teacup on the windowsill and did not move it to make room for anything. I wrote our names on a card for the buzzer and left May's number with the super. I learned the timing of the light. 9 o'clock made the table brave. 3 o'clock turned the hallway into honey. I said out loud, "This is my home." Saying it was not magic, only maintenance, like watering something that grows best when you keep it a little thirsty. On the second Tuesday, I went back to the library. Louis waited with his cap in his hands, like a man trying not to crush a bird. He traced onion again, and then we grew the word into simmer, and then simmer into patience. And by the end, we had a stew on the page that tasted like afternoons that do not apologize for how long they take. I walked home in a slow rain that made everything honest. My daughter opened the door before I knocked. "You look like you after Tuesdays," she said. "Has anyone said that to you lately, that you look like yourself after doing the thing that is yours?" Sundays found their new contours. I still go for pancakes and noise. The dog still arranges himself as a rug under the table with a face that says crumbs are a sacrament. The difference arrives after the plates are washed. I kiss foreheads and pockets of hair, grab my coat and say, "I'm going home." No one asks if I am sure. The street between our doors became a blessing. It holds the parting with gentleness and returns me to a room where silence fixes my shoulders. Do you have a street, literal or not, that could carry you back to yourself without making anyone else smaller? I noticed how quickly the children adjusted. My granddaughter keeps a tiny notebook in my kitchen to write words she likes from whatever I'm reading. Porch, steadfast, blue. She says some words feel like houses. My grandson waters the plant on the windowsill and speaks to it in a very formal tone, "Sir Leaf, your drink," as if the plant were an officer returning from a small war. He asked me where I go on Tuesdays when I'm not here. I said, "I go help a word sit still for someone." He seemed satisfied. What explanation could you offer a child that teaches them 10 years of boundaries in one sentence? There was a conversation I avoided and then survived. I told my daughter that the note about the stove months ago had felt like being enrolled as a child. She closed her eyes. "I didn't know how to say I was scared without making a rule," she said. "Next time, say scared and ask how we can make it safe and still mine," I said. We practiced right there in the kitchen. It took us less than a minute to rewrite months of weather. If you rewrote one sentence this week, swapped rule for fear plus request, whose shoulders would drop first?
Nights returned as a country with borders I recognize. I read until my eyelids make decisions for me. I do not listen for anyone else's dishwasher. Sometimes I wake at 3 and walk barefoot to the window because the street lamp turns the branches into a delicate drawing. It is not loneliness, it is aloneness, a word that tastes different when you are allowed to choose it. Have you ever noticed how the same room can be prison or sanctuary depending on whether the door answers to you? May and I became a small committee of 2. On Tuesdays, she walks with me to the library and waits with a crossword in the lobby. On Fridays, I take her soup in a jar and she returns the jar with a note that says, "This held comfort. Reuse." We exchange plants and recipes and 2 kinds of silence, the companionable kind and the sacred kind. She says we are golden roommates without the rent. What person within walking distance could be written onto the map of your week until their name becomes a place? The first real test did not arrive with sirens. It came with a calendar. My daughter texted late one night, "Emergency recital rehearsal Thursday, 9 to 11. The exact hour my errand had no name. I felt the old reflex reach for its shoes. I could hear myself offer to move my morning like a chair that is always happy to be helpful. I put the phone down and looked at the sticky note on my own cupboard. How can we make it safe and still yours? I walked to the mirror and practiced the sentence like a musician plays scales, not for applause, but for muscle memory. Then I called. Yes to the rehearsal, I said, and yes to me. I'll be home at 11. The spare key is with May. The tea is proof that I exist. She laughed because the phrase proof of tea had already made its way into our house lore. We both hung up relieved. No one had to swallow to keep the other from drowning. Where in your life could "and" save 2 truths that deserve to live? I keep a small ledger now, but it is not of expenses, it is of returns. The price of rent returns in mornings that belong to me. The price of a latch returns in an afternoon nap where dreams arrive without a visitor's pass. The price of flowers returns in a home that remembers it is a home, not an efficient warehouse. If you kept a ledger of returns instead of costs, which line would surprise you by how profitable it is? I am not pretending friction disappeared. It just changed its costume. Sometimes I lock the door and forget the key inside, and the indignity makes me want to phone shame, as if shame were a locksmith. Sometimes my daughter uses the cupboard words on her children, and I hear my own sentences return to me with small fingerprints. It makes me proud and uncomfortable in equal parts. Sometimes Tuesday rains feel like too much weather for a woman with a canvas bag. On those days, I walk anyway, because practice is how a life learns its steps. Which small practice deserves to continue even on days when it would be reasonable to skip? There is joy in the details that never auditioned for the role of joy. The way the afternoon light folds itself across the table and makes a diagonal of permission. The way my chair creaks, a little different from the one at my daughter's house. My creak now, my sound of settling. The way the library smell clings to my coat, as if paper and breath wanted to come home with me. The way my name looks on the buzzer card, not larger than anyone else's, not italicized, simply there. If you made a museum of tiny joys in your home, what would the first 3 exhibits be? Sometimes I still feel the soft grief of stepping away from noise I love. I finish pancakes and see the dog waiting for his crumbs, and I think, what a good life to sit here all day. Then I stand up and feel the better life, my life, pull like a tide with my name in it. I kiss foreheads and put on my coat. "Where are you going now?" my grandson asks, already knowing. "To be me for a while," I say. He nods, a serious nod, like a boy who knows a soldier is going on a mission that looks like walking 4 blocks. What sentence could you use at a doorway that blesses the parting instead of apologizing for it? We invented rituals that no one told us to invent. On the first Sunday of every month, we drink tea at my table and read the index card we wrote together. Love equals safety plus sovereignty. We check the latch, the calendar, the lemons, the flowers. We add one small gratitude that isn't a bandage and one small adjustment that isn't a threat. Last month, the gratitude was quiet that doesn't feel like punishment. The adjustment was moving my Tuesday tutoring half an hour later because Luis changed shifts. My daughter wrote it on her calendar too, not because she manages me, but because she wanted to know when to expect my proof of tea. What would your family's index card say if you wrote it in pencil and read it only often enough to keep it true? The neighbors came into focus like a photograph finding itself. The woman on the second floor who hums when she waters her plants. The man on the corner who fixes bikes for half the street. The couple who argue about crossword clues with a softness that suggests they are simply practicing the art of staying. I learned 2 names a month. When the elevator stopped between floors for 7 honest seconds one Thursday, we breathed together like 3 people who had not planned to become a team, but briefly were. Community is not an app. It is a series of small rehearsals you don't cancel. Where could you rehearse being part of where you live without needing a committee? I kept my body in the decisions because bodies never learned to lie. I asked it questions more than I used to. Do both shoulders stay on the pillow? Do my feet step into my own kitchen before they step into anyone else's day? Does the lock sound like nervousness or like kindness when it completes itself? Does my last purchase feel like a sigh or a small flag planted in ground that I am allowed to call mine? If your body could vote on your living arrangement with a simple yes/no card, what would it hold up right now? One afternoon, I wrote the letter I read to you at the end of Block 2, the one I never mailed. I copied it in my best careful hand and slid it into the drawer with the tea. Sometimes I take it out and read it as if I were the daughter and not the mother. It keeps my heart bilingual. The letter ends with, "I am not leaving love when I choose my own home. I am inviting love to meet me at my address." If you wrote a letter to the person you love most about the shape of love that lets you keep your name, what sentence would you underline twice?
Moving 4 blocks away did not make me a saint. I still have days when I want to fix my daughter's life by moving furniture in my head. I still have moments when I am tempted to be indispensable, because indispensable is a flavor pride likes to wear. On those days, I water the plant and ask it for advice. It says, by doing nothing dramatic at all, grow at the edges you actually have. Plants are very wise and very bad at errands. Which green thing could be your coach in a language that doesn't use verbs like rescue? Work. It returned as something useful and gentle. The literacy room smells like pencil wood and someone's shampoo. I keep a small box of index cards, each with a word that matters in a kitchen. Boil, slice, cool, wait, stir. Luis once laughed and said, "The last one is the hardest." We practice wait together by counting to 8 slowly with our fingers on the table. Sometimes he beats me because patience is not age-dependent. What word on your table right now needs to be traced until it stops running away?
I promised you a way to be family that does not require anyone to disappear. Here is what it looks like most days. 2 front doors with traffic going both ways, a calendar with both names in ink, a cupboard with sentences for when fear dresses as helpfulness, a latch that dignifies rest, a neighbor's number that is not a secret, a street that carries love like a bridge instead of a leash, a plant that gets water, a child who learns that adults can be close without being one body, a mother who leaves while she still feels like herself and returns while she still wants to. None of this belongs on a brochure. All of it belongs in a life. If this story helped you imagine a kinder way to be family, pressing like is a small way to tell the machine that long conversations from older mouths deserve corridors. It's quiet, it's free, and it helps this reach the next person who is about to hang up their key without realizing it matters. And if you want the next letters and maps to arrive without you searching, subscribing brings them to your porch like a newspaper with your name, the old kind, the kind you can fold. Before we close, come with me to the evening. There's soup on the stove in my small kitchen, the kind that forgives you for measuring with your heart. I put a ladleful into a jar for May and a bowl for me. The window makes a square of light on the table. I turn the latch, not because I am afraid, but because the period at the end of a sentence makes the paragraph make sense. My phone buzzes, a photograph from my daughter. The kids with flour on their faces and the dog in a paper crown. "We're making your pancakes," she writes, and the crown is labeled Sir Crumb. I send back a picture of my bowl and type, "Proof of soup." She sends 3 hearts. I put on my shoes and carry the jar down the hall. 4 blocks later, I will leave their house while I still feel like myself. That is the trick I wish for you. Leave while you still feel like you. Return before you have to ask the room for permission to be a person. If this listening with a tightness in your chest, let it loosen with something small and true. Choose one ritual that will be yours this week. Choose one sentence to tape inside a cupboard. Choose one door that will complete its sentence. Choose one neighbor's name to learn. Then notice how the weather in your house changes by a degree you can feel but not measure. A new way to be family is not a miracle. It is a structure, practiced kindly, repeated until it becomes ordinary. Ordinary is the highest compliment I know for a life that keeps both love and a name. Tomorrow, I will wake before the birds again. The tree will listen. The kettle will begin. The key will finish its circle. I will be Eleanor in the room that is mine, and later I will be Eleanor at a table 4 blocks away, and no one will have to disappear for either truth to hold. If this is the story you needed, carry it to someone who might need it tonight. If it is not, keep the sentence that fit and let the rest walk back with me into the quiet. Either way, may your door make the sound you need, and may your name stay written in ink where you can see it. If this helped you keep both love and a name, subscribe, and the next chapter will come to your porch like a newspaper with your name, the old kind, the kind you can fold.